When we first met, it felt like I'd wandered into the kind of love they wrote songs about in the 70s. Her name was Nicole Nikki to her friends, and she carried herself like someone who had known both hardship and grace, and learned how to keep both at a distance. We met at a friend's 4th of July barbecue in Larkspur, Colorado. She wore cut-off jeans and a smirk that said she'd heard every pickup line twice. I offered her a cold beer and a story about how I once accidentally sold a used car to a minor league pitcher who thought I was a priest. She laughed. I was hooked. Back then, things were good. No, better than good. We cooked together, took weekend road trips with no destinations, and adopted a rescued tabby named Marbles, who never liked me but tolerated my presence when Nicole was around. We talked about everything. She knew about the time I missed prom because I took my sister to the ER instead. I knew her favorite poem was something by Neruda, about losing without bitterness. We even made a ritual out of Sunday pancakes and 60s vinyl. And when she told me early on that she'd had 5 serious relationships before me, I didn't flinch. I'd never had anything close to serious, unless you count awkward high school crushes or the time I held hands with someone on a church mission trip. I told her I appreciated the honesty, that her experience didn't scare me. And I meant it. But looking back now, I think there were signs. The way she'd tense up when certain names popped up in old texts. Or how she once said, sometimes people hurt others not because they want to, but because they're scared of being left behind. It sounded poetic at the time. Now I realize it was a quiet confession. 5 years in, our life had a rhythm. A good one. The mortgage was nearly paid off. I ran my modest graphic design business from home, and Nicole worked part-time at the local library, occasionally editing for self-published authors. She had a quiet intensity, always journaling, sketching, reading philosophy books annotated in pencil. I thought I knew her. I really did. But something changed last fall. It started subtly. Her questions grew sharper, more defensive, like she was rehearsing arguments I hadn't heard yet. She spent more time in the guest room, claiming she needed space for editing. Then there was the last-minute trip to Santa Fe for a writer's retreat she hadn't mentioned until the day before. I told myself I was imagining things. That love requires trust, and trust means giving space. But the thing about silence is, it echoes. And I kept hearing the wrong things. It all started with a laptop. Nicole's laptop, technically hers, broke, and that's when everything went downhill. She asked if she could use mine for a few days while the repair shop was open. She promised she would use her own user profile and stay out of my work files. I believed her. Of course I did. But a few days later, she forgot to log out. I didn't peek. Not at first. I just opened my laptop and her profile was still logged in. For a second I thought, no way. Nicole wouldn't be careless enough to leave her entire profile open on my computer. I mean, she once password protected her grocery list. But there it was, right there in the palm of my hand. I almost laughed. It was like a magician revealing a trick in the middle of a performance. Then I saw it, a draft of an email, unsent. The subject of the letter read, "I miss you very much." My hand hovered over the mouse. I knew this was the moment the line between trust and truth. I pressed the button. The letter was addressed to someone named Adrian. A name I didn't recognize. I've told Luke all about the people I've had long-term relationships with, but not about you. I never considered you a relationship. Maybe it wasn't fair. Maybe you were more than that. I don't know why I keep thinking about that weekend in Austin. I shouldn't miss you. But I do. I stared at the screen like it was a detonator. My heartbeat slowed and increased, each beat like a knock on the door of denial. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay next to her while she slept peacefully, or pretended to sleep. I didn't sleep a wink, staring up at the ceiling and imagining what Adrian looked like. Taller? Funnier? Did he know Neruda, too? The next morning, I made her coffee as I always did. Added cinnamon, as she liked. She smiled, thanked me, kissed me on the cheek. And I felt like a man feeding a wolf that had already eaten his cattle. After that, I started to notice more. A second phone charger in the car. A pair of earrings I didn't remember buying. A notebook in the glove compartment with pages torn out on the back, neatly torn out, like she didn't want anyone to know there was anything in there. I did the math. Not logical math, but emotional math. The kind where every memory becomes a variable, every sentence a cipher. And the numbers didn't add up. One night, I broke down. She was in the shower. I opened her wallet, looking in it for nothing and everything at the same time. And there was a check from a hotel in Santa Fe. 2 guests. 1 room. A date that didn't coincide with a writer's retreat. That night I sat on the porch in the dark, holding marbles in my lap. She never sat on me. She never liked me at all. But that night she climbed on me, purred and looked at me like she knew. And I burst into tears. Cried like a man who had just realized he wasn't the protagonist in his own marriage. When Nicole came out and saw me in that state, I expected her to ask what was wrong. But she didn't ask. She just said, "It's cold outside. You should go inside." At that moment, I realized that we were no longer in the same story. We were in 2 different books, mistakenly put on the same shelf. But I still didn't confront her. I hadn't yet. I wanted to catch the truth in mid-sentence before she had time to rewrite herself. I needed one more clue. One more slip-up. One more reason not to be the fool she was starting to think I was. It was a Thursday night when I made my decision. I was done waiting for the truth to confess itself. If I was going to walk through fire, I'd rather build the damn path myself. Nicole suggested dinner at La Pedal, a cozy French bistro where the tables are too close together and the wine is always too expensive. We hadn't been there since our 3rd anniversary, the one where she gave me a hand-drawn portrait of marbles, and I gave her a necklace she hasn't worn in over a year. She dressed up more than usual. That bothered me. A burgundy dress I didn't recognize. Hair curled. That perfume she only wears when she wants to be remembered by strangers. We sat down, menus open, a candle flickering between us like it was trying to burn the last thread of our intimacy. I looked at her, and all I could think was, "How long have you been gone, really?" "Work's been stressful," she said, eyes drifting. "Yeah?" I replied, smiling too easily. "At the library, or in Santa Fe?" She blinked just once, but I caught it. Like a poker tell. "Both," she said carefully. The rest of the meal passed in fragments. I asked mundane questions and watched how she answered, too polished. Every reply felt pre-written and edited for clarity. I knew that tone. I was married to it. After dessert, I excused myself to the bathroom, then slipped out the back and circled the building. I wasn't proud of it, but I dropped a GPS tile in her bag the night before. Paranoia makes you resourceful. Her location history lit up like a constellation. And there it was, 3 Thursdays in a row, same address. Not a bookstore. Not a cafe. A residential building in 5 points. One I didn't recognize. I copied the address into my phone and stared at it like it would explain everything. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I checked her purse again. The GPS tile had moved. Not far, but enough to tell me she'd found it. She hadn't said anything. She was pretending not to notice. The dance continued, and I was still leading, barely. That's when I decided to visit the address. I told her I was taking a walk. She nodded, said, "Clear your head," like she was reading from a cue card. The house was a modest duplex, white siding, porch light on, wind chimes singing a tune I swear I'd heard in a nightmare. I didn't knock. I just stood there. And then the door opened. A man stepped out. Early 40s. Athletic build. Wearing a hoodie and that smug, unbothered smile some men are just born with. I didn't recognize him, but somehow I knew him. Knew what he was. What he meant. "Hey," he said, not even surprised to see me. "You must be Luke." I said nothing. She said you might show up. Eventually. And right there, in the cold, in the middle of a quiet street, I laughed. I laughed so hard I startled a neighborhood cat. Because the absurdity was too thick to ignore. I was being outplayed in a game I didn't even know I was in. He just stood there. And I said, "Do you like Neruda?" He blinked. "The poet?" I smiled. Didn't think so. Then I turned around and walked back to the car. After the storm, there is peace, not the kind of peace that calms you down, but the kind that is like the calm before a new storm. That's how I was the next morning. The tension had subsided enough for fatigue to set in. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and an old Fleetwood Mac record spinning in the background. Nicole walked in wearing one of my t-shirts like it still meant something, kissed me on the forehead, and started humming Landslide. The irony didn't escape me. And then there was a knock. Well, not a knock, but a thump. A sharp, rhythmic pounding on the front door, as if someone was trying to hammer Morse code into the wood. Nicole froze, pouring her tea. "Are you expecting someone?" "No," I answered, already getting up. Opening the door, I found the surprise I needed the least, her father. Walt. A retired Marine. Current conspiracy theorist. A man of few teeth and many opinions. He burst into the house with a camouflage bag and the smell of menthol cigarettes, just like in the war. "Your doorbell is broken," he bellowed. "No," I muttered. "Well, maybe your ears are. I've been knocking for 2 whole minutes." Nicole's face contorted into something between a smile and an apology. "Daddy, what are you doing here?" Walt set his suitcase on the chair as if claiming territory. "Just thought I'd stop by. Go fishing. Clear my head. Spend time with my daughter and her graphic designer husband." "Designer," I corrected. "Right. Photoshop and fonts." "I see." I glanced at Nicole. Her eyes were silent. I didn't know he was coming either. But she smiled and replied, "Sure, Daddy. You can stay in the guest room." The guest room. The one Nicole was using more and more often. Of course. That night, as Walt told us stories about deep state microchips and weather satellites, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't rage. It wasn't betrayal. It was something dimmer, like an audience watching a play they never auditioned for. After dinner, he pulled out an album of photos. "Got them from Mom's attic," he said. "Thought you might want to see your mom in her prime, Nikki." Nicole sat down next to him and started flipping through the pictures, pointing out aunts and cousins I'd never seen. And for a moment, everything felt like a normal evening. Family. A quiet evening. Then she turned the page and there he was. Adrian. Standing next to Nicole at a family reunion in 2008. Hugging each other. Laughing. Like it was just another page in a well-worn scrapbook. My heart raced. Nicole stared at the picture longer than she should have. Walt kept talking and she was somewhere else entirely. Later, when Walt finally retired to the guest room with a beer and a stack of his favorite anti-government pamphlets, I found Nicole in the kitchen with the picture in her hands. "He was dating my cousin," she said before I could ask. "It was never serious. It's just familiar." I nodded. Didn't say anything. Then she added, "He made me feel noticed. At a time when I really needed it. I felt like screaming. Or laugh. Or cry. But instead, I leaned on the counter and said, 'Funny. I thought I did that.'" She looked down. "I did. Just not always when I needed to." Nicole didn't laugh. But I did laugh. Just once. Short, bitter, rust-flavored. I used to think betrayal was something dramatic, a lipstick-stained collar, a perfume you didn't recognize. Turns out sometimes it's just a voicemail that shouldn't be. It was a Sunday morning. Walt had gone to the bait store to argue with strangers about fluoride. Walt thought fluoride was a conspiracy of the plumbing companies and Nicole was at the farmer's market buying overpriced kale and pretending we were still eating together. I was cleaning up the kitchen, half listening to old voicemails and trying to make room in my phone. And then I heard it. "Hey, it's me. I've been thinking about you all morning. Last night was... God, it was like old times. Call me when you can. Just, not too late." I know he suspects something. I didn't recognize the number. But I recognized the voice. Adrian. I froze, soap dripping from the sponge in my hand like it was bleeding. My heart wasn't beating. It slowed down like it was slowing down. I listened to the message again. And one more time. And then I sat up and laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it was too stupid not to laugh. I made her pancakes and made playlists while she coordinated sleepovers with her past. Irony of fate? Nicole always insisted that we had no secrets. She even went through a phase of radical transparency, which I now realize only meant that she wanted me to confess things she could use later. I didn't argue with her that night. I didn't even mention the voicemail. Instead, I made dinner. Lasagna. Her favorite. I opened the bottle of Chianti we'd been saving for our next anniversary, an event that now felt more like an obituary. She seemed surprised by this effort. "What's the occasion?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just thought we could use a good meal," I said. "And maybe a toast." "To what?" "To clarity." She smiled. "To clarity." We clinked glasses. She ate like nothing had happened. I watched as it happened. After dinner, I said, "I was going through my voicemail today." She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "You did?" "Yes." It was a funny thing. Adrian's voice came up. Still as smooth. Still smug. Still very present. She turned pale. Her fork clinked against her plate. She began. "You don't need to explain," I cut in. "I understand everything now. I really do." "No, Luke, it's not what you think. It never is. That's the thing about liars. They always think they're one sentence away from salvation." She stood up, trembling slightly, crossing her arms over her chest. "You don't understand what I've been through." "No," I said, rising and meeting her gaze. "But I'm beginning to realize what I've had to live with." There was a long silence. The kind that doesn't end, but only creates a pause for a future argument. "You're not perfect either," she said finally. "No," I replied. "But I've never hidden who I am." She walked out of the kitchen. I sat back down, finished my wine, and stared at her empty plate. Marbles ran into the room and jumped on the table, pushing her glass to the edge until it fell and shattered. I looked at the cat and said, "That's one way to sum it up. I've heard people say that silence is gold. But after that night, the silence in our house felt more like lead, a heavy, cold lead that you can't carry without bending your spine." The next day, Nicole hardly spoke to me. She moved around the house like a ghost with a grocery list. I could feel her trying to regroup, trying to realize how much I knew, how deep the knife had gone in. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She wasn't even lying anymore. She just avoided me. I stopped working. I couldn't focus. My clients were getting autoresponses about a personal emergency, and I was wandering around the house with a cup of coffee that I kept heating up but never drank. It became my mug of emotional safety. Walt, of course, didn't notice the tension. He spent most of his time in the garage trying to turn a broken lawnmower into what he called a self-defense tracked perimeter defense vehicle. Said it would come in handy when the grid collapses. I almost asked him to test it in traffic. One afternoon I found myself in the attic. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I saw a shoebox labeled wedding. Inside, photos, cards, pressed flowers from Nicole's bouquet, our vows on faded notebook paper. Her handwriting was crooked, like she still believed in something. I read mine first. I memorized every word. Then I read hers. "Luke, you are the silence that soothes me and the storm that stirs my soul. With you, I feel like I can start over. I'm safe with you." I laughed so hard I almost fell through the ceiling. Safe. That night I slept in the guest room. Nicole didn't ask why. Maybe she was relieved. Marbles followed me and curled up next to me as if we'd finally chosen a side. The next morning, Walt came into my room to eat cold cereal and asked, "Are you kids fighting?" "Something like that." He nodded. "Well, marriage is hard. But if she's like her mother, she'll probably figure out how to win even if you keep score." That didn't help. But it was the truth. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But every day I got quieter and quieter. I think that's what scared her the most. Not the confrontation, the absence. The vacuum I left when I stopped trying to be heard. 3 days later at breakfast, she finally asked me a question. "Are you planning on leaving me?" I didn't answer right away. I buttered my toast. I stared out the window. Then I said, "I think I'm already gone. I just forgot to get my stuff." She set the coffee aside. Her hands were shaking. "Luke, I messed up. I know I screwed up. But why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I wanted to believe we were still worth protecting. Even when you stopped trying." Her eyes moistened, but I didn't trust her tears anymore. They seemed rehearsed. I got up, left my plate on the table, and walked out onto the porch. Sat down and watched the sun break through the trees, as if unaware of what had happened within our walls. That's when I realized that the pain in my heart doesn't come all at once. It seeps in like a leak in the ceiling, slowly, quietly, inevitably. Until one morning you wake up with wet feet and no roof. The letter arrived on Wednesday. A real letter, ink, paper, envelope. Postmarked 3 days earlier. I found it in the mailbox, wedged between a coupon catalog and a grand jury subpoena I had no intention of answering. It was addressed in Nicole's handwriting. I carried it into the house and stared at it for a while. It didn't look like an apology. It felt like closure, clothed in the form of a whisper. I poured coffee, sat down at the table, and opened it. The very first words made me freeze. "Luke. If you're reading this, I probably didn't have the courage to say it to your face." That was the main theme, wasn't it? My cowardice. The letter was 6 pages long. A page of memories. Confessions. Half explanations and full of guilt. She spoke of Adrian not as a lover, but as a shadow. Something she clung to when she didn't know who she was. She called it a traumatic connection. She called it a mistake that began long before I came into her life. She wrote about me, too. About how I loved with patience. How I helped her feel simple when her mind was in chaos. And then she wrote a line that cracked something in me. "The worst part wasn't that I hurt you. It's that I knew I was hurting you and I just hoped you wouldn't notice." Halfway through the reading, I had to stop. I walked out onto the porch with the letter in my hands and held it like it was sacred. Marbles followed me, curled up on the step. We sat in the morning sunlight like two veterans who had survived the same war but lost different battles. I should have been furious. But all I felt was emptiness. A grief that doesn't scream, it just sits with you. When I finished reading, I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. I didn't know what to do with it. Burn it? Frame it? Mail it back with my own notes? And then there was a knock. Nicole stood in the doorway, red-eyed, with a bag in her hands. She looked smaller than I remembered. It was as if the weight of her choices was finally starting to weigh on her all at once. "I'm going to stay with my sister," she said. "For a while. Maybe longer." I nodded. She stepped forward and put something on the table by the door. My wedding ring. I hadn't even noticed that she'd taken it off my finger in my sleep the night before. It lay there, gleaming like an heirloom. "I'm sorry," she said. "For everything." "Sorry doesn't make it better," I said. "I know." Then she said something that surprised me. "I loved you, Luke. And I still do. I just didn't know how to protect what wasn't already broken." And just like that, she was gone. The house was quiet. Quiet. I walked to the kitchen, poured her mug of coffee down the drain. I sat down at the table. And I cried. Not the way I'd cried before, this time, not because of what I'd lost. But for what I'd almost kept. Later that night, I found something again in the attic that I hadn't seen in years. A sealed envelope from my mother. She had died 2 years before Nicole and I met. Inside was a note and a picture of her and my father dancing in the kitchen. Her note read, "If you ever forget what love looks like, it's not in grand gestures. It's in the quiet moments. Washing dishes. Singing songs together. Forgiveness." I stared at the picture for hours. And then I had an idea. Not about Nicole. It was about me. This story wasn't supposed to end here. Nicole left the letter on the table, next to my half-solved crossword puzzle and a cold cup of coffee as a final offering from someone who knew that words were the only thing she had left. I took it inside and stared at it for a while. It didn't look like an apology. It looked like closure clothed in the form of a whisper. I poured coffee, sat down at the table and opened it. The very first words made me freeze. Luke, if you're reading this, I probably didn't have the courage to say it to your face. That was the main theme, wasn't it? My cowardice. The letter was 6 pages long. A page of memories. Confessions. Half explanations and full of guilt. She spoke of Adrian not as a lover, but as a shadow. Something she clung to when she didn't know who she was. She called it a traumatic connection. She called it a mistake that began long before I came into her life. She wrote about me, too. About how I loved with patience. How I helped her feel simple when her mind was in chaos. And then she wrote a line that cracked something in me. The worst part wasn't that I hurt you. It's that I knew I was hurting you and I just hoped you wouldn't notice. Halfway through the reading, I had to stop. I walked out onto the porch with the letter in my hands and held it like it was sacred. Marbles followed me, curled up on the step. We sat in the morning sunlight like two veterans who had survived the same war but lost different battles. I should have been furious. But all I felt was emptiness. A grief that doesn't scream, it just sits with you. When I finished reading, I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. I didn't know what to do with it. Burn it? Frame it? Mail it back with my own notes? And then there was a knock. Nicole stood in the doorway, red-eyed, with a bag in her hands. She had just returned from her sister in Pine Grove, whom she always described as quiet but too far from good coffee. She looked smaller than I remembered. It was as if the weight of her choices was starting to weigh on her all at once. I'm staying at my sister's, she said. For a while. Maybe longer. I nodded. She stepped forward and placed something on the table by the door. My wedding ring. I hadn't even noticed that she'd taken it off my finger in my sleep the night before. It lay there, gleaming like an heirloom. I'm sorry, she said. For everything. Sorry doesn't make things better, I said. I know. Then she said something that surprised me. I loved you, Luke. And I still do. I just didn't know how to protect what wasn't already broken. And just like that, she was gone. The house was quiet. Quiet. I walked to the kitchen, poured her mug of coffee down the drain. I sat down at the table. And I cried. Not the way I'd cried before, this time, not because of what I'd lost. But for what I'd almost kept. Later that night, I found something again in the attic that I hadn't seen in years. A sealed envelope from my mother. She had died 2 years before Nicole and I met. Inside was a note and a picture of her and my father dancing in the kitchen. Her note read, "If you ever forget what love looks like, it's not in grand gestures. It's in the quiet moments. Washing dishes. Singing songs together. Forgiveness." I stared at the picture for hours. And then I had an idea. Not about Nicole. It was about me. This story wasn't supposed to end here. The next day, I showered, shaved, and put on a shirt I hadn't worn since our anniversary dinner, still smelled faintly of her perfume. Not because I wanted to win her back. But because I wanted to remember who I'd been before I started fading into someone I didn't recognize. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I just drove. Pine Grove was an hour out, maybe more with traffic, but I didn't feel a thing during the drive. Just kept thinking about that photo of my parents dancing in the kitchen, the one that had somehow survived 3 moves and 5 years of silence. Nicole's sister, Angela, opened the door. She looked surprised, tight smile, wary eyes. "Luke," she said. "She's not here." That threw me. She left this morning. Said she had something to take care of. I nodded. "You know where she went?" Angela hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "She sent me this." It was a picture of the sculpture garden downtown, the one where I took Nicole after our first fight. We'd stood under the twisted metal arch that looked like it might fall over at any moment. I joked that it reminded me of us. She said, "Yeah, but it's still standing, isn't it?" I found her there. She was sitting on the edge of the fountain, wearing the scarf I bought her for Christmas 3 years ago, the one she claimed was too itchy. Her eyes found mine as I approached, and for the first time in weeks, neither of us looked away. "I thought you might come," she said. "I thought you might be gone for good." She took a breath like it weighed something. I needed to stand in a place that reminded me why I ever fought for us. I didn't sit down. I stayed standing. I think I needed that. I read your letter, I said. She nodded. And I believe you loved me. I do. Tears welled up. But I kept going. But I don't think you ever believed you deserved the kind of love I gave you. She covered her mouth with her hand. And that's the thing, Nicole. I was never trying to fix you. I just wanted to walk beside you. You kept running ahead, or circling back to your shadows. Silence stretched between us. Then she said something I hadn't expected. I'm pregnant. The wind stopped. I sat down slowly. Is it mine? She nodded, crying now. Yes. I found out 2 days ago. I was going to tell you in person. I didn't want to write that in a letter. My mind raced. Years of built resentment collided with the kind of news that rewrites futures. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything, she whispered. I just needed you to know. You deserve to know. And then, with her hands shaking, she added, I don't want to raise this child the way I lived, full of lies, running from truth. She stood. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But I'm done hiding. I looked up at her. Then stop running. Just for once, stop. She stepped forward and sat beside me. And we just sat. Under that unstable arch together. Not fixed. Not forgiven. But facing the same direction for the first time in a long time. There's a line I read once, we are not punished for our sins, but by them. And if that's true, then I had been walking through my sentence long before Nicole ever slipped into someone else's arms. The days after our conversation at the sculpture garden were oddly quiet. Not cold, just still. Like the calm that settles on a battlefield after both sides have run out of ammunition. I didn't know what to do with her pregnancy. With us. With the history we kept digging up like bones in a backyard we swore was clean. So I did the only thing I could. I wrote. Pages and pages. Not letters, not accusations, just thoughts. Memories. Skeletons I had buried so deep I almost forgot they were mine. Like the fact that before Nicole, I had a habit of emotionally disappearing. I called it protecting my peace, but in truth, I was just afraid of letting people in far enough to see how unfinished I really was. My silence wasn't always kindness. Sometimes it was just cowardice. And Nicole? She didn't just fall into secrecy. She was groomed by it. Years of relationships that taught her to lie first and apologize later. She never expected someone to stay. So when I did, it confused her. Maybe even scared her. We were both trying to build a home with blueprints drawn in trauma. I remember something my dad once told me, back when I was 14 and had just failed a math test. He said, Luke, the problem isn't always the numbers. Sometimes you're just using the wrong formula. It hit me now harder than it did back then. We had been solving for love using equations built for survival. One night, I walked into the nursery, the one we'd started painting 2 years ago before we miscarried. We never finished it. I told her we could try again someday. She nodded, but I knew she never really believed it. I stood there a long time. The half-painted stars on the wall. The crib we never put together. It all felt like a time capsule buried for a future we never claimed. And I finally cried. Because for the first time, I let go of the idea that love alone was enough. Love needs truth. It needs vulnerability. It needs two people who are brave enough to show each other the ugly parts. I wasn't always that man. And maybe she wasn't always ready to meet one. But now we had this child, this maybe. This chance. That night, I left a note on her pillow. Not dramatic. Just quiet. I'm scared too. But maybe we can be scared together. The next morning, I didn't find her in the kitchen. I didn't hear the usual clatter of a tea kettle or the smell of cinnamon toast. What I found was the nursery door cracked open. Inside, Nicole sat on the floor, painting stars again. One hand on her belly. She looked up, eyes red, but steady. I didn't know where else to start, she said. I knelt down beside her. took the brush from her hand, dipped it in yellow. We painted in silence. The silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like hope. There's a strange thing about healing, it doesn't arrive like thunder. It shows up in teaspoons. A full night of sleep. A breakfast shared without flinching. A quiet laugh that sneaks out before you realize you're still capable of one. A few weeks passed. We didn't call it reconciliation. We didn't name it anything. We just started showing up for each other in small ways. I fixed the leaky faucet Nicole had been ignoring. She brought home paint samples for the nursery, muted greens and soft sky blues. One afternoon, we built the crib. The same one we never touched. It sat in the corner for years like a question mark. But now we answered it, piece by piece, screw by screw. Nicole caught me smiling while tightening the last bolt. "You look different," she said. "Yeah? You look, here." I didn't know how to respond to that. But she was right. I had been living half a life, afraid of being fully known. And despite everything, despite the betrayal, the silence, the history, we were finding a rhythm again. Not a repeat of what we had. Something new. Something less perfect, more honest. The baby is due in 5 months. We don't know the gender. We decided not to find out. Some things, we figured, are better met with wonder. I won't pretend we're healed. Healing isn't a switch. It's a choice you keep making every day. To try. To forgive. To stay. And to anyone who's made it to the end of this story, maybe you've been where I've been. Maybe you're in the middle of it now. Let me leave you with this. If you love someone, love them with truth. And if you're hurting, let someone see it. We waste too much time trying to seem whole when it's our broken places that make us human. Don't wait for a perfect moment to speak your heart. They don't exist. And if you're walking through betrayal, or silence, or loss, know this. You can start again. Even if all you have left is a paintbrush and a wall full of stars.